Welcome to the third episode of Atlantica's Fuel for Thought, a reimagined energy podcast. This is a podcast where you can learn about all things energy happening in Atlantic Canada. I'm Jonathan Alward, and I'm the Vice President of Policy at the Atlantica Centre for Energy. Atlantica's goals is to empower and develop the region responsibly to create a more prosperous future for Atlantic Canadians. In this episode, my guest and I will explore energy security. Our goal is to help listeners and viewers better understand some of the efforts taken to ensure energy is secure for customers across Atlantic Canada. How are local electrical utilities meeting current energy security concerns, and how will these efforts evolve as we work to decarbonize our energy systems? Before I introduce our guests, though, it's important to understand what energy security is, and it can mean different things to different people. In a general sense, energy security means having energy available when it's needed. There are several key aspects of energy security that energy companies and governments tackle daily to ensure energy is available for customers when they need it. These aspects include availability, affordability, accessibility, environmental acceptability, resilience, and diversification. Utilities deal with issues from supply chain disruptions and consumer affordability concerns to cybersecurity threats and extreme weather events. I'd encourage you all to visit atlanticaenergy.org and read Energy Security 101 to learn more about this topic. You can also find a link to this webpage in the show notes. With this background in mind, it's my pleasure now to introduce my first guest, Marie Maclean, the Vice President of Power Production and Energy and Risk for Nova Scotia Power. Marie grew up in Halifax and has worked in the energy sector for nearly 35 years. She's a registered professional engineer and holds bachelor's degrees in engineering and science with a major in mathematics. Nova Scotia Power provides 95% of the generation, transmission, and distribution of electrical power in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia Power is a subsidiary of Emera and has about 550,000 residential, commercial, and industrial customers and over 2,300 employees. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you very much for having me here today, Jonathan.
Thanks. I'm also pleased to be joined by Angus Orford, the Vice President of Corporate Planning and Energy Supply for Maritime Electric. Angus is a native of PEI and holds bachelor's degrees in civil engineering and science with a major in physics and an MBA from Dal. He also served as Maritime Electric's VP for Customer Service and was VP of Operations with Fortis Ontario. Since 1918, Maritime Electric has delivered electricity in PEI and now serves over 89,000 customers and employs over 220 staff. The company is a subsidiary of Fortis. Welcome, Angus, and thank you both for joining. I think we should jump right into the discussion questions. Ensuring enough energy supply is available to meet customers' demand is a cornerstone of energy security, and especially being able to get that supply from reliable sources. Marie, I know that Nova Scotia Power and Nova Scotia are transitioning off coal by 2030, as required by the federal government, and is making progress towards having 80% of its electricity supply coming from renewables by 2030 as well.
That's right.
Where does Nova Scotia Power's electricity supply come from today, and how is this supply evolving over the next 5 years?
Well, a significant amount of Nova Scotia's electricity supply is already coming from renewable resources. In fact, more than 40% of Nova Scotia Power's electricity sales are renewable. That renewable energy comes from hydro generating plants that are installed in the province, and we also have wind energy in the province. We have biomass generation, some solar energy, and we receive a significant amount of renewable energy from Muskrat Falls that we import from Newfoundland. Now, the other 60% of Nova Scotia's electricity comes primarily from our power plants in the province, and those are fueled by coal. We also have power plants that can run on natural gas, and some of those natural gas plants have the flexibility to switch to oil if natural gas pricing becomes expensive, which can occur, for example, during the winter months. And then a smaller percentage of our electricity comes from fast-acting generators that run on light fuel oil, and these are usually used for periods of peak energy demand. And then finally, we also import electricity across the tie line between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. So that's where Nova Scotia's electricity supply comes from today. And as you say, John, Nova Scotia is in the midst of a transition off of coal by year 2030, which is mandated by the federal government. And Nova Scotia Power is also following our province's clean energy plan, which will have us reaching 80% of our electricity supply from renewable resources by year 2030. So to get that 80% renewable energy, over the next 5 years, coal generation is going to be replaced primarily by new wind and by battery storage, and by the addition of fast-acting generators powered by gas, and a conversion of a coal plant to natural gas. So, in summary, natural gas is going to remain an important resource for our region, along with the 80% renewable energy, which again will be primarily wind and imported hydro energy from Muskrat Falls.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point too. Obviously interprovincial electricity ties are very important, and with each province having different natural resources, like Newfoundland and Labrador having a wealth of hydro, I think it makes perfect sense that they continue to benefit the maritime provinces as well. But for listeners of our last podcast, we talked about natural gas imports and how New Brunswick and Nova Scotia in particular are still very reliant on natural gas being imported up through the United States. So I think it's important to appreciate, with energy security in mind, where a lot of that energy comes from. Even if we could make more of it, produce more of it in the region, we're still using a lot of it coming up from the United States.
Yes, that's right. And the natural gas comes to us through a single pipeline
Mm.
that runs from the US through Maine and then up into Nova Scotia, which is at the end of the pipeline. And gas is in the midst of an evolution in the business where we're shifting from today, which is more of a baseload usage of natural gas, to a future where natural gas will be involved with load and wind following, because wind is an intermittent resource. And as I mentioned, it's going to be key to integrating renewables into the system. So we'll need to be looking at that, how we can manage gas going forward and differently, given that we are just getting it from that one single pipeline and we're at the end of the pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Angus, can you walk us through Maritime Electric sources of electricity for the grid? And does the island generate enough electricity on its own to meet its own demand?
No, not on Prince Edward Island. We do have renewable resources, so wind generation, and we purchase all the wind that the Prince Edward Island Energy Corporation, Crown Utility, produces, 92 megawatts. There is also a merchant wind farm on Prince Edward Island that produces in the order of 103 megawatts, but all that energy is exported. So really the only natural resource that we have on Prince Edward Island for generating significant amounts of energy is wind. And then we do have some rooftop solar and a couple of solar farms. That one's owned by the Prince Edward Island Energy Corporation. And it provides some energy. The remaining energy we're importing. And we have a participation agreement in Point Lepreau, and that supplies about 15% of our needs. It's an entitlement. It's not an equity position in the Point Lepreau. And then we purchase energy through an energy purchase agreement with New Brunswick Power. And the cross-section of energy that we purchase in that is similar to the carbon content cross-section that New Brunswick Power supplies its own customers. So the net effect is that 82% of our energy that we produce does not have any emissions associated, which is very close to what the national average is. When you look at across Canada, 60% of it is hydroelectric and 20% nuclear. So we're very good position that way with the levels of emission that our electricity content has. But we are entering and we've experienced enormous load growth, and probably I believe our needs and very similar to our neighboring provinces is dispatchable capacity is certainly required. And it also reflects the the competing objectives that we do have in our regions with respect to our desires for reducing carbon footprint. Although we don't have coal-fired generation on Prince Edward Island, we did at one time. We historically had heavy fuel oil. That plant has been decommissioned and was recently torn down. And our desire is to have light fuel fired, quick-acting generation combustion turbines in the hopefully the near future.
Interesting. Well, that's a good segue to the next question I wanted to ask about population growth. And we know that electricity demand, certainly across Atlantic Canada, has been increasing and will continue to do so in the near future. As you mentioned, driven in large part by population and economic growth. Especially over the last 4 or 5 years, and this is combined with more electrification for things like home heating and with vehicles. And I think utilities across the region are planning for this load growth to continue. Marie, what's Nova Scotia Power doing to deliver more electricity and cleaner electricity at the same time, as you mentioned, to its customers? And how can this be done affordably for ratepayers while keeping the energy supplied energy secure?
Yes, we do continue to experience load growth in the province. So along with delivering more electricity, Nova Scotia Power is mandated to deliver cleaner electricity to customers as we transition to 80% renewables by 2030. So to achieve this transition, our provincial government is going to be adding fast-acting gas capacity, as I mentioned, and as well a significant amount of new wind to the province. Nova Scotia Power will purchase this wind power and supply it to customers. So as a start, this is keeping our dollars at home in the province, which is a good thing. Now, as the province brings on this new wind as a major energy source, there's a requirement to maintain the stability of the electricity grid because, as we know, wind is intermittent. It doesn't blow all the time. So to bring this stability, Nova Scotia Power is advancing a number of large-scale capital projects, and those include the grid-scale battery facilities that I mentioned, and as well it includes the construction of a new 160-kilometer transmission intertie between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which will improve the reliability of the interprovincial power grids and again support the expansion of renewable energy production. So to help reduce rate pressures during the transition and during these projects, Nova Scotia Power is leveraging low-cost equity financing opportunities and entering partnerships for these projects. And those include with the Canada Infrastructure Bank and with the 13 Mi'kmaq First Nations in Nova Scotia. And in addition, both Nova Scotia and the province are also leveraging federal tax credits as well as NRCan funding, which are available for projects that are aimed at supporting decarbonization efforts. So these efforts will further limit the impact to customers of the coal to renewable transition. And finally, John, I just want to mention that by continuing to use existing generating stations past 2030, but in a different way, we can reduce the cost of transitioning from coal to clean. And so, for example, by our planned conversion of an existing coal plant to natural gas, and by changing the operation of another coal plant to an oil-powered peaking resource at very low capacity factors, those are ways that we can make efficient use of existing generating station and contribute to the cleaner future at lower cost. So all of these efforts are in place to reduce the cost to customers as the province transitions.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, for example, in New Brunswick, NB Power is planning to convert the Beldoon coal generating station to use torrefied wood pellets.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think theirs would be probably use less intermittent, certainly, than the plans in Nova Scotia. But I think that's a really important reminder for one of the ways the utilities are trying to make sure that ratepayers aren't unnecessarily burdened by additional costs from phasing off of those traditional coal-fired assets.
Yes.
So, Angus, another aspect of energy security, certainly with affordability and reliability, is reliability in the face of storms and other potential supply disruptions. Like infrastructure. Um, this is for listeners. This is something known as storm hardening in particular. What is Maritime Electric doing to prepare for increasingly severe weather events, like we've seen recently in the Maritimes with hurricanes, forest fires, floods, for examples?
Mm.
It's certainly a concern for both U2 and Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia in particular.
We're doing similar storm hardening, adding guying. We had carried out some studies because we certainly had the experience of a few sporting events with Hurricane Dorian about I guess 4 or 5 years ago, and then Hurricane Fiona. And it really highlighted the need on Fiona in particular because trees were uprooted, way outside the right of way. Our power lines exist and are placed at the pleasure of the province on their government right of way. But these trees were from meters away and brought in. So in circumstances like that, it's very difficult to design your power system. Fundamentally, a power system is designed economics on what's the trade-off. And but to be in a much better position, we've been far more aggressive in our tree trimming and seeking the neighboring properties, private properties, cooperation on being able to ground cut trees in on private property. And it's really out of a request and then cooperation and the effort, explaining to the customer that not only will their reliability improve, but their neighbors' reliability will improve. So as we're trimming along roads, removing danger trees that are further in on private property with the permission of the landowner, we're gaining significant improvements. And just last weekend, we had a fairly strong windstorm, and the system's performing very, very well. And these are all things that you also factor in. Is there circumstances where you put in higher classes of pole for greater pole strength? And then sometimes also reviewing if there's even in on your system areas that that you're going to have greater loading, either ISO loading or heavy snow loading and that sort of thing. Because I do believe we all designed very similar design parameters in the Atlantic provinces. And essentially the CSA standards of adding a half-inch of radial ice and 60 mile an hour wind loading, that sort of thing. But those recent weather events have really heightened the focus on what are the other things we should be doing to tweak our design parameters to improve the overall performance of the system.
Yeah, with everything that happened, especially after Hurricane Fiona and the aftermath, I think there's probably been a push for more distributive generation, like electricity generation closer to communities or individual homes, like rooftop solar or community solar, for example. Are you going to see more of this on the island as a result, or is it always going to be a cost-benefit trade-off?
Well, we do have about 45 megawatts of rooftop solar on Prince Edward Island, but what's got to be remembered is, those rooftop systems needs the excitation of our system. Our system has to be energized before there's a benefit. And it just comes back to, I believe the realities of is there economical distributed generation? And, that's sort of the challenge. It's not like we have a lot of streams or smaller rivers on PEI that we could dam up or put smaller hydroelectric generators on and try to gain that. Most of our river systems on PEI are tidal. So, it is somewhat reflective of the overall Maritimes. I mean, as you go across Canada, you have, some of the largest hydroelectric companies in the world and the largest batteries in the world. And in the Maritimes and in Atlantic Canada, we do have to play with the cards that were dealt. And it's just our reality.
Yeah, very, very important context. A little different in Newfoundland and Labrador, certainly,
Oh, yeah.
but it's very, very important to recognize those limitations in Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia in particular, and to a degree, New Brunswick as well. Uh, Marie, there have been a lot of discussion about the potential to develop more clean energy in the region for export projects like hydrogen, biofuels, offshore wind could potentially attract billions of dollars of investment to Atlantic Canada. How can the electrical utilities balance the need to provide secure energy to current ratepayers while enabling future economic developments that can grow the economy through the energy sector in particular?
Yeah, it's a great question. Safely providing reliable energy to our customers will always be the top priority for any utility. And by active engagement in economic development within a region, utilities like ours, like Nova Scotia Power, can meet this priority and at the same time support regional growth. Our role here is to be supportive. So, in other words, we want to understand what the short term and the long term needs are of our province and its growth priorities. And we want the potential future developers of, say, hydrogen, offshore wind, to have accurate information about the energy system. This will help inform the best approach for the region and to realize potential benefits for the electricity system that can come about with these initiatives. We're very excited, excuse me, about the future potential prospects for this region, such as, for example, offshore wind. The early data is indicating that there's an amazing offshore wind regime here that can achieve extremely high capacity factors. And so by staying close to and supportive of the regional growth potential and working with developers and collaborating with the province, we can help contribute to realizing the best potential that exists in this region and create value for ratepayers while continuing to keep safe and reliable energy a top priority.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it's something too that the Atlantic region in particular can really have as a strength is, because we're small, it should be more accessible for governments to talk with provincial or prospective developers, and also talk across provinces and hopefully share
Yes.
resources more consistently and effectively across the region. And as you mentioned, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick are building a new tie
A
line
new tie line.
transmission
Yes.
project, which is going to be really helpful. And certainly, hopefully, the same can happen and enable future additional connections to Prince Edward Island. But in the same vein, Angus, is the question to just previous, and as we discussed earlier, the reliability of supply is critical to maintain a secure system. At the same time, utilities in the region are increasingly co-owning new generation and other investments with private sector businesses like power purchase agreements, um, where the province is the principal utility that doesn't own the asset directly. So how do we balance these considerations for ratepayers, the cost again versus making sure that our supply of energy is going to be secure?
Well, I think one of the things, and wind is very attractive on Prince Edward Island. We like to say we have an offshore wind farm with an island underneath it. Some of the capacity factors are very attractive, but it is a small market on PEI. And that's where the benefit, when Marie talks about the transmission expansion between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, I mean, we are a beneficiary of that. Interconnections and transmission are always so difficult to get established or expanded upon. But once it's done, everybody uses it. And, it's challenges in licensing and permitting and building it. And those, increasing and strengthening those interconnections, it benefits everyone. And to the similar extent, the further expansion to our neighboring provinces outside of the Maritimes we do sit right next to the largest battery in the world in Hydro-Quebec. And but you look at also the demands on their system for energy and capacity and that sort of thing. And when I see the transition, the little voice that's always in the back of my mind is saying, make it a marathon, not a sprint. Because when on economics and affordability, as you take it, a step at a time, that goes a little more hand in hand with the economics and the affordability. Part of the challenge we have right now is, with the federal government mandate, coal-fired generation, and the reality is for us in the Maritimes is that it's 25% of the baseload generation. And, then the move to having to remove that. And the example that I use is I was in Ontario, a sister company, for 9 years during the Green Energy Act. And essentially they decommissioned their 4 coal-fired plants and replaced them with natural gas. But then there was government, unfortunately, some government policy that drove rates and added to the market prices of the costs that we have to be very, very sensitive on the affordability. And in the Maritimes, we are a higher cost fundamentally in the marketplace. So I think we've got to be very sensitive on keeping the product affordable. And we will. I'm confident we see the same types of increases that our neighboring utilities have over the last couple of years have recently announced. It just timing of contractual obligations and that sort of thing. It's one of the things that competitive energy prices are a fundamental aspect of an economic driver. These things have to be kept in mind as government policy is being developed on moving through the transition. And also, to the extent on policies with respect to population. Our province, we all recognize we need as many new Canadians in this country as possible and increase the population. And it was fairly dramatic on Prince Edward Island. We went from a population of 145,000 to 175, 180,000, and we're probably 185,000 now, and over a 5-6 year period. So these are all things that have to be taken into consideration on the infrastructure, being able to deliver the service and the affordability to customers. So I go back to, there's many competing objectives that we're all in it together. We all recognize the need and the transition. Marie's challenges are my challenges, are NB Power's challenges as well, because it's also a relatively small region.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and I think it's a point well taken to make sure that as long as we're meeting our objectives, that we are taking this marathon, the energy transition at a reasonable pace, so we can obviously finish the race. But I think it's important to the utility planning, make sure we understand where that finish line is going to be and the route that we need to get there. And I'm really pleased to see the utilities of the provincial within each province working together more closely to make sure that these strategies can be complementary and use each other's assets and resources to the best way possible for ratepayers, to make sure the rates are reasonable, but also to make sure that the electricity grid in particular can be reliable and secure well into the future. But thank you again, both of you, for joining Atlantica's Fuel for Thought. I'd encourage the listeners and viewers to learn more about Maritime Electric and Nova Scotia Power's energy security efforts through links in the show notes. And until next time, knowledge is power, so please keep learning about energy.